This time, we're taking a look at something that's been in the news a lot lately, global smoking trends.
Interesting.
You've probably heard about it. It's kind of all over the place.
Right.
We're seeing some really surprising, I guess you could say, patterns in terms of who's smoking.
Absolutely.
And where they're smoking, and the differences between genders is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and I think the most fascinating part is how it's changing.
Yeah, that's what we're going to try to uncover today, right?
That's right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Are you ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Small drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
Now, you probably already know that men tend to smoke more than women globally. But did you know that over 40% of all male smokers in the world live in China? That's wild, right?
Yeah.
But here's the even crazier part. Only about 2% of Chinese women smoke.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing when you see those numbers side by side. But what I find most fascinating about this whole topic is that it's not just about the stats themselves. It's about understanding all the forces at play, the cultural factors, the economic realities, and even historical trends. All these things come together and shape these global smoking patterns.
It's like a giant puzzle we're trying to piece together. And we've got this global map of smoking rates right in front of us.
Yeah.
And one thing's for sure, in almost every country, men are lighting up way more than women. So the question is, why?
Well, one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle has to do with how different cultures view smoking, especially when it comes to women.
You mean like whether it's socially acceptable or not for women to smoke?
Exactly. In many cultures, especially in parts of Asia and the Middle East, there's a huge stigma around female smoking.
So like this unspoken rule.
Yeah.
Smoking is just not seen as ladylike in those societies.
Yeah, pretty much. It can even lead to women being isolated or having their freedom restricted.
Wow, that's intense. But are there any other cultural factors at play here?
Well, in some cultures, smoking is tied to ideas about masculinity.
Interest.
It's seen as a symbol of strength or resilience, even rebellion in some cases.
So men might feel pressure to conform to those expectations.
Exactly, especially in social situations.
It's amazing how powerful those beliefs can be, how they can really shape people's behavior. But it's not just about social pressure, right?
Right.
And health concerns must be a big factor too,
Yeah.
especially for women.
Absolutely. Women tend to be more health conscious overall, and they've been the main target of a lot of anti-smoking campaigns. Those campaigns really highlight the risks of smoking for women's health.
Especially when it comes to things like pregnancy and reproductive health.
Exactly.
Those messages really hit home.
Yeah.
But let's not forget, cigarettes are not cheap. So could economics also be playing a role in this gender gap?
For sure. In many lower-income countries, women might simply not have the money to spend on cigarettes.
Their budgets are already stretched thin.
Yeah,
They have to prioritize basic needs for themselves and their families.
exactly.
So even if there wasn't a social stigma, economics could still be a limiting factor.
Absolutely.
It's interesting, though, because this is in stark contrast to how tobacco companies used to market their products.
Yeah, absolutely.
For decades, they specifically targeted men with their advertising.
You're right. They used images of rugged cowboys and successful businessmen. It was all about linking smoking with masculinity and achievement.
And creating that cool image.
Exactly.
Those classic images are still so vivid in my mind.
It's pretty amazing how they shaped public perception for so long.
It's a completely different picture from the health warnings we see today.
It really is.
Speaking of contrasting pictures, this map of smoking habits is really interesting. It clearly shows that men dominate in most countries.
That's right.
But there are some exceptions that really stand out.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like Nauru, for example.
Right.
In Nauru, women smoke at the same rate or even higher than men.
Yeah, that's a fascinating anomaly.
What could explain that? Is there something unique about their culture that makes female smoking more acceptable?
Well, it's probably not a simple answer. It's likely a combination of factors. Nauru, like a lot of island nations, has gone through a rapid westernization. And gender roles have shifted significantly.
So as more women entered the workforce and took on roles traditionally held by men, they may have adopted some of those habits as well.
Exactly, smoking being one of them.
It's interesting how those shifts can have unintended consequences. But let's not forget the tobacco industry itself.
They definitely played a role in shaping these global trends.
How so?
Well, they've aggressively targeted new markets, especially countries with weaker regulations.
Makes sense.
And they often tailor their marketing specifically to appeal to women. This can lead to higher female smoking rates in places where awareness of the health risks is lower.
It's a constant battle between public health and profits.
It really is.
But you know what's really mind-blowing? Some of the facts we found during our research.
Oh, I'm all ears.
Well, we already talked about how China has a huge number of male smokers. But did you know that there was a time when women in some Western countries smoked almost as much as men?
Really? I didn't know that.
It's all connected to the history of cigarette advertising.
I'm curious to hear more.
In the early 1900s, cigarette ads were almost exclusively aimed at men. They portrayed smoking as a symbol of masculinity and rugged individualism.
Yeah, I can picture those ads.
But things started to change around the middle of the century.
How so?
Suddenly you had these catchy slogans like, "You've come a long way, baby."
Oh, yeah, I remember those.
They were specifically designed to appeal to women.
Wow, that's pretty sneaky.
It's a prime example of how marketing can manipulate perceptions.
Absolutely.
It really highlights the fact that individual choice isn't the whole story.
Right.
These campaigns were intentionally crafted to exploit those changing social norms.
They were trying to link smoking with female empowerment and liberation, cleverly aligning it with the feminist movement of the time.
It's fascinating how public perception of smoking, for both men and women, is constantly evolving and being influenced by so many different factors.
Absolutely. It's a complex interplay of forces.
And speaking of evolving trends, there's one that's particularly concerning. Teenage girls in some countries are taking up smoking at an alarming rate,
Oh, wow.
even though smoking rates among adult women are staying relatively low.
That's not a good sign.
It could mean that we might see a shift in this gender gap in the future.
And not in a positive direction.
Exactly.
It just goes to show that we can't afford to be complacent. The tobacco industry is constantly adapting its strategies.
And public health efforts need to keep up.
Absolutely.
It's a constant battle. But here's a fact that really surprised me. You ready for this?
Hit me with it.
Higher income women are actually more likely to smoke than lower income women.
Interesting.
But here's the kicker. The exact opposite is true for men.
Wow, that's a real twist.
It really challenges the assumption that smoking is mainly a problem in lower socioeconomic groups.
Right. Clearly there's more at play here than just income or education level.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating. We're peeling back the layers to reveal the complex interplay of factors driving these gender differences in smoking. And we're just getting started.
Yeah, it really highlights how important it is to look beyond those simple explanations, to really consider the full spectrum of influences at play here. But let's dive a little deeper into why these patterns exist. We've talked about social norms, cultural expectations, and economics. Now let's explore those 5 key reasons we've identified that are driving these gender differences in smoking, starting with cultural and social norms. So, how do these norms, particularly surrounding masculinity and perceptions of female smoking, shape these global trends?
Well, we've already touched on how smoking can be deeply intertwined with ideas about masculinity in certain cultures. Men might feel pressured to smoke, to fit in with their peers, or to project an image of strength. And on the flip side, women who smoke often face judgment, stigma, or even social isolation because it clashes with those traditional expectations of femininity. It's fascinating how those expectations can differ so dramatically around the world. Like in some places, female smoking is seen as rebellious or even a sign of loose morals, while in other cultures it might be more accepted.
You're absolutely right. What might work in one country or community could backfire completely in another. So any successful public health campaign really needs to be sensitive to those nuances of local culture and social norms.
It's not just about saying smoking is bad, right? It's about understanding the social fabric and the pressures people face in different contexts.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move on to the second reason. Economic differences. We've already established that in lower-income countries, women might prioritize basic necessities over cigarettes. But how does this play out for men?
Well, for men in those same lower-income countries where tobacco is often very cheap and readily available, cigarettes can become kind of an affordable way to deal with the stresses of daily life.
It's really sad to think that economic hardship can drive people to seek solace in harmful habits. A quick smoke might seem like the only escape, even if it's ultimately damaging.
Yeah, it's a tough reality.
This really highlights how important it is to address poverty and improve economic opportunities as part of a broader strategy to reduce smoking rates, especially among men.
I completely agree. Addressing those root causes of stress and hardship is absolutely essential.
Okay, now shifting gears to our third reason. We can't ignore the influence of advertising and industry tactics. So how have those marketing strategies shaped global smoking habits, especially along gender lines?
Well, as we talked about earlier, tobacco companies have a long history of really tailoring their marketing to specific genders. Historically, they heavily targeted men, linking smoking with masculinity, success, even rebellion.
Oh yeah, those old cigarette ads, they really played into those aspirations, didn't they?
They did.
But as regulations tightened in many Western countries, the industry kind of shifted its focus, right?
Exactly. They set their sights on new markets, places with weaker regulations, particularly in low and middle income countries. And their tactics evolved, too. They started targeting women more directly, trying to capitalize on the feminist movement by framing smoking as a symbol of progress and independence.
Like those "You've Got a Long Way, Baby" campaigns.
Exactly.
They were so effective at reframing smoking in a way that appealed to women.
They were incredibly effective.
It's a stark reminder of how adaptable and manipulative those marketing strategies can be.
It's a real challenge for public health officials to keep up and counter those tactics.
Yeah, it's like a constant arms race.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to reason number 4. Policy and regulation. What impact do government policies actually have on overall smoking rates and the gender gap?
Well, countries that have implemented strong anti-smoking policies, like Australia, Canada, and the Scandinavian nations, have seen significant decreases in overall smoking rates, often with a narrowing of the gender gap as well.
So it's not just about awareness campaigns. It's about actually putting those concrete measures in place.
You got it.
What kind of policies are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about a multifaceted approach. Things like higher taxes on tobacco products, comprehensive bans on smoking in public places, graphic warning labels on cigarette packs, restrictions on tobacco advertising.
So it's about making it less appealing, less accessible, and less socially acceptable to smoke.
Exactly.
It's really encouraging to see that governments can actually take these steps to curb this global epidemic.
It's a step in the right direction.
But we also can't forget about the power of social influence, especially in the workplace. So this brings us to our 5th reason, peer influence and workplace culture. How do these factors contribute to those gendered smoking patterns?
Well, smoking often becomes ingrained in workplace culture, particularly in industries where taking smoke breaks is the norm. For men, this can create a sense of camaraderie and belonging, reinforcing that association between smoking and masculinity.
So it becomes a bit of a ritual, like a way to bond with colleagues and de-stress from work.
Right.
But it's not always the same experience for women, is it?
Not necessarily. While women in high-stress environments might also pick up smoking as a way to cope or fit in, they often face more judgment and stigma for doing so.
So it creates this difficult situation for women.
Yeah, where they might feel pressured to smoke, to be part of the social scene. But then they also face negative perceptions for engaging in what's often seen as unfeminine behavior.
It's a real double bind.
It is.
It speaks to the need for healthier workplace cultures, ones that provide support and stress management resources for everyone, regardless of gender, without resorting to harmful habits like smoking.
I couldn't agree more.
But let's zoom out for a moment. Look at the big picture here. We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring this complex interplay of factors driving those gender differences in smoking. So what are some key takeaways you want our listeners to walk away with?
Well, the most important takeaway is this. These striking differences we see in smoking between men and women aren't simply due to biological factors. They're largely shaped by this complex web of social, cultural, economic, and historical factors.
So it's not about inherent differences between men and women, but about the environments they navigate and the pressures they face.
Exactly.
It's those social norms, cultural expectations, economic pressures, and even targeted marketing strategies.
All of those contribute to these patterns.
And it's important to remember that these trends aren't static either.
You're right.
While male smoking rates are slowly declining in many parts of the world, we're also seeing that concerning rise in female smoking in some regions, particularly among younger generations.
It highlights the need for ongoing vigilance and adaptation in our public health strategies.
Yeah, we can't let our guard down.
Definitely not.
But there is some good news, right?
There is.
Countries with strong anti-smoking policies and more gender-equal norms tend to have lower smoking rates overall.
And a smaller gender gap.
So that suggests that progress is possible.
With the right policies and a real commitment to social change.
That's definitely a hopeful sign. But I'm curious, do you see these gender trends shifting even more dramatically in the future? Could we actually see a world where women smoke more than men globally?
That's a tough question. While it's impossible to predict the future with certainty, I think a complete reversal of the gender gap is pretty unlikely in the near future. Those deep-rooted cultural norms and historical factors we've talked about will likely continue to shape smoking patterns for years to come.
So those beliefs and habits don't just disappear overnight.
They don't.
But things are constantly evolving.
Of course. As more women enter the workforce, take on leadership roles, and challenge traditional gender roles, it's possible that some of those historical barriers to female smoking might weaken.
So we might see a narrowing of the gap.
Yeah, as gender roles continue to evolve. And we can't underestimate the influence of younger generations either. Their attitudes towards smoking are often quite different, shaped by a greater awareness of health risks, and less tolerance for the social and environmental harms of tobacco.
That's encouraging. If younger generations are leading the charge for a smoke-free future, that's a good sign for public health overall.
It is a positive sign.
But it's also crucial to remember that the tobacco industry is always adapting.
They're constantly refining their strategies to target new markets and appeal to younger demographics.
It's an ongoing battle. Requires constant vigilance.
Absolutely.
It's a challenge for sure. It requires a real collective effort and some outside-the-box thinking to truly tackle this issue.
But what about some specific approaches? What do you think holds the most promise for creating a smoke-free future?
Well, one area that I think needs more attention is addressing the root causes of smoking. Things like stress, poverty, social inequality. If we can build a society where everyone has access to education, economic opportunities, and healthy coping mechanisms, we can start to chip away at those underlying drivers of tobacco addiction.
I see what you mean. Creating environments that support well-being, instead of pushing people towards those harmful habits.
But what about the role of technology in all of this? Could it play a part in creating a smoke-free future?
Oh, absolutely. We're already seeing some really innovative approaches using technology to help people quit.
Like what?
Well, there are smartphone apps that provide personalized support, wearable devices that track smoking patterns, even virtual reality programs that can simulate the experience of quitting and help people develop coping strategies.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's pretty cool.
It sounds like technology can offer a level of personalization and support that wasn't possible before.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see how technology can be used in this way.
What about the role of education? How can we make sure young people really understand the risks of smoking and empower them to make informed choices?
Education is key. We need to start early, teaching kids about the health consequences of smoking in ways that are engaging and age-appropriate.
Yeah.
And we also need to equip them with the critical thinking skills to resist peer pressure and those manipulative marketing tactics we talked about earlier.
It's about empowering them to become advocates for a smoke-free world.
Exactly.
And speaking of advocacy, what role can individuals play in all of this? How can they help create change?
Well, I think every voice matters. Individuals can support organizations working to reduce tobacco use, advocate for stronger policies in their communities, and most importantly, talk to their friends and family about the dangers of smoking. Change really starts with those conversations and raising awareness.
Yeah, it's about shifting those social norms and expectations.
Yeah.
Creating a culture where smoking is no longer seen as normal or acceptable.
Exactly.
So the future generations can grow up in a world where tobacco use is a relic of the past.
That's the ultimate goal, and I believe it's achievable if we work together.
I love that. It's a vision worth striving for. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. To all our amazing listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has shed some light on this complex world of gender and tobacco use. We encourage you to continue exploring this topic, ask questions, and be part of the solution.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about the forces driving tobacco use, the better equipped we'll be to create a healthier, smoke-free future for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of our deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning. And as always, thanks for joining us.